Call the meeting to order. Roll call.
Mrs. Sherling?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Here.
Mr. Pollock?
Here.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Pepcorn?
Here.
Mr. Grinberg?
Here.
Mr. Judd? Mr. Hendrickson?
Here.
Ms. Carlson?
Here.
Campbell?
Here.
Mr. Wayland?
Here.
Mr. Thorsted?
Here.
Mr. Olson? Okay, we have a quorum.
Very good. First item of business is election of vice chair. We'll start with that first. Kevin, do you have something to
Yeah,
tell us?
Mr. Chair, I would nominate Mayor Jonathan Judd as vice chair.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and second. Aren't you going to give a speech about him?
I will. You won't want me to.
A roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Sherling?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Pollock?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Pepcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Mr. Carlson? Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland?
Excuse me.
Miss Carlson?
Yes.
Me, Ms. Carlson. Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Mr. Olson?
Designation of secretary. Do I have a motion to designate our secretary? Kevin, are you going to help me out there again?
I'll make the motion for Heather.
Yeah.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
No, on this particular aspect, Heather will be now, but there might be some point when Joel's hired somebody that we could use as a secretary, but she really enjoys this, so I don't think she wants to give it up. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Very good, thank you.
I mean, aye.
Approval of the minutes from previous meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
And second.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any changes to the minutes? Otherwise, all those in favor say aye.
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 Moved, approved. Approve the order of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the order of the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Executive Director report. Joel, are you up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the board. I'll start with the program controls report. Total expenditures on the project to date, this is as of the end of December of 2019, it's $525 million. I'm going to keep doing this until we get it all figured out, and we will allow access to the board members for this plethora of information. Again, of course, we're tracking the estimate of completion for various items, and we're looking at overall cost to date. This is something that I'm reviewing on a bi-weekly basis to keep track of where we're at fiscally. No concerns here. As the board knows, forecast year budget 2019 was significantly below. This was due to the changes in the Plan B after the governor's task force and ramping back up into where we're at today. So, as you can see, our spending here, $526 million, total expenditures to date for the Diversion Authority's responsibilities. I have a number of Cass County Joint Water Resource District approved contracting items to report out to the board. All of these are related to property acquisition services. 3 task order amendments for additional appraisal services and 1 reduction in appraisal services, and a task order 5 for HMG, which is HDR's as a sub-consultant for their property acquisition services necessary for the upstream mitigation area. Just a brief overview of activities and achievements for this past month. We're preparing 3 projects for bidding. We will have these ready to go in the next few months. Work package 43D is the Hickson Main Avenue Storm Sewer Project. It's one of the projects that we have in the Hickson Oxbow area. This will provide for drainage from the interior of the Hickson-Baki levee system, and we're anticipating that to be constructed this summer. We also have the completion of the Oxbow-Hickson-Baki wetland mitigation project. That will also be bid this spring and constructed this summer. And then we have another work package for property structure mitigation on properties that we own to remove those houses on those properties. Current projects under construction We're still wrapping up the 2nd Street South and Main Avenue flood mitigation project. We have a few minor items to clean up on that project before we close it out. The Oxbow, Hickson, Baki pump station and levee, that is complete, just some minor punch list items to wrap up there as well. And work package 50A, which is a property structure mitigation package that we're just finishing up as well. Some P3 activities, we've incorporated the stakeholder comments from the Corps and other stakeholders into the RFP for draft 4. We've held a hydraulics and hydrology teleconference with the Corps of Engineers and HMG to basically get our model all up to speed for the release with the draft 4. We've consulted on tributary flows with the Corps of Engineers in West Fargo. A lot of this has to do with the communications that we've had with changes with how the diversion project interacts with the Cheyenne and the Horace diversion project. And if the board will recall, these changes occurred in the last few months. It really allows us to use the Cheyenne River in and through West Fargo as a pretty significant mitigation project that covers most of the diversion authorities' mitigation requirements environmentally. So we continue to move forward with that. We resolved some access and security approach issues with the alternates, and I can take any questions with that. I think we have that all pretty well cleared up for the RFP. We've resolved the technical and price proposal evaluations and incorporated that into the RFP documents. That was a discussion we had at the last meeting. Defined and incorporated the WIFIA requirements into the RFP documents. I know Mr. Shockley has been working night and day to get that incorporated. We've also resolved some fish passage requirement issues, and we've completed the interim technical submission reviews and reports and provided those to the proposers with the draft RFP. We did delay our draft RFP a couple of weeks. We're now anticipating to release that to the developers on February 19th. That delay was in conjunction to some H&H modeling issues that came up that we needed to address in order to not have any substantial changes after we release the RFP. So look ahead, we'll be issuing that draft RFP and beginning one-on-one meetings and communications with the development teams. The NDSU Ag Impact Study is almost complete. We've received the final draft. A lot of great information in there that we'll be able to discuss about the impacts of the diversion project with the upstream mitigation area. Submit a property rights acquisition and mitigation plan to the Office of State Engineer. They have that. They are reviewing it. We anticipate an approval of that mitigation plan, which is a legislative requirement to receive State Water Commission dollars for the project. We expect an approval in March. We also anticipate in the next few months the final approval of the CLOMAR for the project. And then the lands team continues to secure the remaining rights of entry for the southern embankment design in both North Dakota and Minnesota. And that's necessary so they can continue to move forward with the design of those elements. We have negotiated the scope for the Phase 2 flowage easement evaluation study. The board can recall this is a pretty major issue for us in valuing the impact upstream for storing water on individuals' properties. So we're going to begin moving forward with that final easement valuation, and it will be a parcel by parcel evaluation of what the costs are for the flowage easement. And then, of course, we'll initiate the bidding of the 3 projects I mentioned on the previous slide. In the next 3 to 6 months, I anticipate solidifying upstream structure mitigation requirements in coordination with permitting agencies and continuing additional outreach to upstream property owners. Our lands team is doing a great job of maintaining the schedule for property acquisition. That is on schedule, and we are on budget as far as the property acquisition is concerned. And as you may know, we're about 50% of the way through the acquisition of the property for the channel portion itself. We continue to support legal efforts for the 2020 contested case hearing. A number of items happening there. We do intend to provide an update to the board on all our legal issues at the March meeting. So, and then we intend to issue the final draft of the RFP in May. That's all I have, Mr. Chair, on that item.
Good. Any questions of our Executive Director, Chad Peterson?
Joel, could you please update me on regarding the RFPs addressing the rec plan? We talked about a series of minimal investment and then with potential of alternates. Where does that stand in terms of updating our RFP for our P3 partners?
That's correct. So what we did is, upon the direction of the board, at the last executive session, we discussed this item. We have taken most of the rec items out that were recommended by the MetroCog rec plan, really focusing more on safety and security as a bid alternate for the project. And so that safety and security would still be some pit toilets, parking lots, some access that is necessary for O&M, some gates and some fencing, and then a continuous trail along the right EMB that would be necessary for O&M purposes, but could also be used as a public facility for people that might be looking to use it as a trail. So those items are in an alternate outside of the base bid.
Outstanding. Thank you.
Mary Shirley.
Thank you. Just an FYI, at yesterday's lands meeting, MetroCog did give a report regarding the recreational component, and they are looking to partner with Fargo Parks, West Fargo Parks, and the North Dakota Parks to see if there's some future path forward that would be funded outside of this group.
Wonderful.
Any other questions? We have Ken Pollock back here, and he usually always asks a question. So welcome back. You've been years on the commission. Now you come back to us. Thank you. And
Thank you.
sitting in authority today, but no questions.
So far.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.
Update from the Corps. Terry, are you going to tell us some stuff? Now, Terry flew in with bad weather just to meet with us today because she wanted to be here for our historic January meeting. Thank you for
I
coming.
wouldn't miss this. Thank you, Mayor. Terry Williams, Corps of Engineers. Hopefully you've got a handout in front of you as usual, and I'll go through this rather quickly. So number one, the diversion inlet structure, the pile test program will continue through the winter, and we look forward to seeing some pretty substantial foundation work next construction season, the deep soil mixing, and then driving of production pile. Number two, Wild Rice River structure, that contract was awarded, and the pre-construction conference was held with Ames here in Fargo on the 22nd of January. We'll be able to provide more on their construction schedule probably at the February board meeting. Number three, Red River structure design. Our team is there this week, and there's some pictures on the back of the handout. They're conducting some structural alternative testing, and you might recognize one of your own here, Matt Stamness, is in the top of the picture, and we're really happy that he could make it with the team to look at all of the alternatives that are looking at with respect to the downstream walls and the riprap and the preformed scour hole and how the water is going to be handled that comes out of those gates in the pretty high events. Number four, Southern Embankment, Plan B design. The 65% design for the western tieback will be provided for your review on 21 February. So we call that Reach SE1, or the western tieback. And we're moving towards a construction contract award. It's likely not to be within our fiscal year, but it will be by the end of the calendar year. So no later than December. It won't affect completing that work in the following construction season, though. And then number five, the I-29 raise design. In case you didn't know, Houston Moore Group is doing that design, and the Corps will be constructing that. And the 65% is scheduled to begin mid-March.
Very good. Any questions of Terry? Grunberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Terry, two questions. One, as we stand here today, Corps is on time and on budget?
We are on time and on budget.
Wonderful. Second question, what's the possibility we're going to have a big lake out by the area and have to wait for water or pump water again, like we did last year?
Being out at the inlet?
Yep.
It won't be as much of a lake as you saw before because they're out there dewatering. They'll be out there dewatering versus having that hole sit there for a year and a half filling up with water. So we're going to be in better shape.
Thank you.
Thank you. Keep up the good work. We like it when it's on time and on budget. Administrative legal, update on the WIFIA action. John Shockley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yesterday, I brought forth to the Finance Committee request regarding our WIFIA application. As the board will recall, in October of this year, of last year, we had received authorization to proceed forward with the credit application for WIFIA. As part of that credit application, one of the requirements, which is one of many, the actual application will be several volumes. We need to include 3 years of audited financials for the Diversion Authority. So we have the audited financials, of course, for the city and the county, but we don't have the audited financials for the Diversion Authority. Yesterday, there was a discussion at the Finance Committee and a recommendation to move forward with engaging Eide Bailey to perform that services through the last 3 years, and then to develop a policy moving forward about if you wanted to alternate having different auditors or how you wanted to develop that procurement policy for auditors in the future. It is somewhat of a time-sensitive matter. In speaking with WIFIA, I routinely have calls with WIFIA at least once a month. It's usually been about every other week. I asked them if we could submit our application and then subsequently submit our audited financials at a later date. There was some willingness to allow that, but they were talking 60 to 90 days being a maximum. So we want to submit our WIFIA application at the end of March. So if we want to stay on time and on schedule, it would be good to engage an auditor to complete the financial audits of the Diversion Authority.
Commissioner Grinberg.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, John did a nice job summarizing. Just to add one other aspect, I think the desire of the Finance Committee, per the policy recommendation, will be to go out for an RFP process after this year, so that we have maybe a 3-year cycle with selecting a firm and get a fair competitive bid to move forward. But the time sensitivity of the WIFIA loan was first and front center yesterday, and we did provide $100,000 in this year's budget for an audit. And I don't believe exactly what Mr. Steen had shared, but I don't think we'll be close to that, but at least we're covered from a budget standpoint to do this.
You want to make the motion then?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. Moved and seconded. Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Sherling? Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Pollock?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Pepcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Ms. Carlson? Yes. Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Thank you. Adopt the meeting schedule for 2020. Is there any conflicts for anybody sitting here? Kevin?
Mr. Chair, just one slight correction on the February 20th, or February 27th date for the MCC JPA board. That has been moved to February 20th. Other than that, I have no other.
Duly noted, so they'll be changing in the February schedule. Any other suggested changes?
I'd move the public meeting calendar.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Approved committee appointments, item 7C. Mary
Chair.
Curling?
Thank you, if I may. We've had these same committees for quite some time, and every once in a while, things get switched up a little bit. But considering Cass County's contribution to the project, I would like to suggest that another Cass County representative be added to the Finance Committee. And that could be a DA appointment if Fargo chose to move a few of their appointees around.
Mr. Chairman, I just, a little more explanation. We have 2 county members now, and we're adding a third to help me understand. I'm not opposed to it, I'm just trying to understand the logic by adding a third.
Well, there's 5 from Fargo and 3 from Cass. And I just felt like that would perhaps represent Cass a little better if it was 4 and 4.
It looks to me like there's 3 from Cass, isn't there?
Correct.
And there's 3 from Fargo.
Well, but when you look at the DA appointments, then there's 5 from Fargo.
Oh, okay. I guess,
On, were they set up, do we have to follow any criteria, or how do we go about changing that? to keep the-
So in the joint powers agreement, we set up the membership, so there would be 3 members from Cass County and 3 members from Fargo. And so if you were going to change or add membership by Cass County, you would need to change one of the DA appointments to a Cass County member. It was set up that way in the joint powers agreement as the size of the committee.
So, Mr. Chairman, change or add, that's where,
Well, your committee size was set by the joint powers
Right.
agreement, so you can't expand it. You would have to switch out one of the DA appointments on the finance committee, which are currently Commissioner Grinberg and Commission President Mayor Mahoney. So one of those 2 would have to be swapped out for a Cass County member.
Mr. Chairman, at that point, then I can't support adding because it may sound selfish, but the 2 of us have longevity, and I can't see either one of us leaving.
Mayor Schilling?
Just to clarify, so you could swap that out, though, and be Fargo appointees. And so you have 3 Fargo appointees. And so you could, Fargo could appoint one of you, leaving another DA slot open.
So you're suggesting perhaps Grinberg moves into Redinger's position, Redinger moves out?
That would be one scenario. I certainly, appreciate, Redlinger's contribution, but he is staff, and I would expect staff to be here anyway. He's an assistant co-executive director, as is Robert Wilson, who I would anticipate would be here anyway.
Commissioner Pipcorn?
I would not support it. I think if you looked at how much the city of Fargo financially is involved in this versus Cass County or Moorhead or Clay County or anybody, I think beyond a shadow of the doubt, we should leave it the way it is. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Mr. Mayor,
Commissioner Pollock?
I think I support what Mary is suggesting. And the idea is I think that the elected officials, other than both of us have our auditors on, I think is reasonable. And Dan Jacobson is a pretty important person on there, coming from Southeast Cass Joint Board, who's doing all the purchasing. But the simple fact is most of this activity is taking place in the county. And the county and the city should be equal on the board.
Mr. Chairman, one more thing.
Pipcorn.
We're not equal. If you looked at how much money is spent and where the money has come from, the vast proportion is from the city of Fargo. And the other thing is the Cass County, Montplaisir is one of their appointments, so if you wanted to swap that out with the commissioner, you could do that.
Well, I for one want Montplaisir to continue on there, and so I don't think.
And I want Mike Redlinger to continue on from our staff, so there you go.
Well, then I guess you end up losing Costin, which we don't want either. I mean, I just think it should be even on both accounts.
Mr. Chairman, I'd side with Commissioner Pepcorn on this, and then have a question. Was this the first time this has been brought to your attention, Mr. Chairman?
It was discussed, Joel and I discussed it early on, and I think what we had elected is the way it's sat, has been the way historically we've done it. And part of it is exactly what you talked about. There's some longevity, and we haven't seemed to have issues. The county seems to represent itself quite well. But I guess, Commissioner Shirley, maybe you should make a motion and we would vote on it and we could solve that issue then.
I would be happy to make that motion then.
So just so the Diversion Authority understands it, your motion is to do what?
Would be to, for the DA appointment, to have a Cass County Commissioner in that position. And, well, and I guess I would probably need to be more specific, because it wouldn't be up to the Cass County Commission to put that person in there. It would be a DA appointment. So I would move to have Ken Pollock be a DA appointment to the Finance Committee.
Is there a second? John, I'm sorry.
Just a clarification, there, you currently have two DA approvals, which, don't want to jump into a policy political question, but which DA appointment would be coming off as part of that motion? Because you only have, the DA board only has two. So right now, we currently have Mayor Mahoney and Commissioner Grinberg as the two DA appointments.
And I would suppose, since Tony's the chairperson, you have to move me, basically, because he's chairing the committee. Kevin, you had a question, Kevin Campbell?
My question is this a, is this the exact same finance committee in 2020 that we had in 2019?
Yes.
Yes.
And this is the way we had originally set up the membership through the,
Yes, Commissioner Campbell, the membership of the Finance Committee is set by the Joint Powers Agreement, where 2 members are appointed by the DA Board, 3 members are appointed by the Cass County Commission. They don't have to be DA board members, they certainly can. 2 members appointed by the City of Moorhead. They don't have to be DA board members. 3 members appointed by Cass County. They don't have to be DA board members. And then 1 from Clay County being appointed and 1 from the Cass County Joint Board being appointed. And none of the member entity appointments have to actually be Diversion Authority board members, but the Diversion Authority appointments have to be board members.
So then if I may?
Yes.
My motion would not work.
Commissioner Sherling, you would just need to suggest, you currently have 2 DA proposed appointments. You would just have to indicate which one you're replacing with Commissioner Pollock, whether that be Commissioner Grinberg or Commissioner Mahoney.
But since Commissioner Pollock is not, he's an alternate to this board, he couldn't serve as the DA appointment, could he?
No, not if he's an alternate.
So
no.
it would need to be Commissioner Steen or Commissioner Peterson.
Which we're on.
To be the DA appointment.
Correct.
And then Commissioner Pollock could be the county commission appointment.
Yeah, your real only
Follow
option
what I'm
is
saying.
Chad Peterson, because he's a board member. Commissioner Grinberg, I'm sorry, Commissioner Grinberg?
Mr. Chairman, this is a great debate, but this hasn't been vetted and thought through to have a logical plan and a step forward. So I'll make a motion to table this until somebody comes back with a more specific plan, because the intelligence sitting at this table to just go about this without a thought process is not who we are. So I'll make a motion to table this.
Is there a second to the table?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call vote?
Mrs. Sherling?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Pollock?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Pepcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Excuse me, Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Ms. Carlson?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
yes.
Mr. Wayland?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
So I'd make a suggestion to the authority that we at least can vote the rest of the committee assignments and appointments. Could I take a motion for that, please?
I so move.
Second.
Any questions on that, Mayor Shirley?
Sorry. I just have a suggestion to, and I want to make sure that, that these committee appointments, attend. And, I know that we don't have a requirement for a number of meetings to attend, but just want to encourage people that if they're on a committee, that they do attend. And I think all of the members here do, but we have members outside this board that have been appointed and then, rarely come to a meeting. So if that's the case, I would, suggest that 6 months from now or 3 months from now or whatever the number might be, that we review this if we need to make changes.
David Campbell.
You just have a question on the motion. The motion would be to keep all the committees the same with the exception of the Lands Committee?
Finance.
Finance Committee. Our Finance Committee has to meet next month before we even have a DA meeting.
Mr. Chairman,
I think we should have it so that they all stay the same for now or whatever until we come up with an
Mr.
alternate
Chairman, that was my intent. By tabling this, it just stops the discussion and moving forward to the current committee stays intact. I would defer to Mr. Shockley on what tabling means from a legal perspective or Robert's Rules of Order. But my intent was, until somebody can convince that there's a well-thought-out plan, this is the same committee that moves forward. Because Mr. Steen and Mr. Peterson have been loyal attendees of the Finance Committee. We had relatively low, not a problem with attendance, so I'm trying to understand the dots connecting here of the intent of this. And so that was my intent with the table.
And Kevin, actually, your question is very good, because I did suggest that we leave the finance off, but you are right, is that actually the counter motion would be to accept this as it is and have that discussion that Commissioner Sherlin talked about, and that may change over the month if something came forward, right? John?
Mr. Chair, the board can approve all the appointments today, and you can come back and change the appointments to committee appointments at a later date. Just under the joint powers agreement, in January, you're required to confirm the appointments of all the boards. That doesn't mean later on in the year, you can't change the membership on a particular board.
Mr. Chairman, so moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Does everybody understand the motion?
No.
No, you got to say it again.
No.
John, would you clarify the motion for us?
I think the intent of the motion is that you would confirm all of the appointments as presented, and then after there's sufficient discussion about changing the DA appointments, then you would bring that off the table and have that discussion.
So, Mr. Chair, to clarify, John, you had presented a resolution. Is that what they're doing, is approving the resolution as presented
Correct.
today? Okay.
Chuck Henderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to verify that we can change members of the boards at any time.
Correct. The only board membership you can't change is the member entity's appointment to the DA board itself. That's the member entities have to appoint you to your positions, so.
But the subcommittees we can.
Correct.
Thank you.
And one other question just from the chair, in trying to relate to Mr. Sherling. Could you add another member to any of the committees?
Currently, that is not contemplated in the joint powers agreement. The membership is set. You can certainly switch out. There's been discussion regarding staff of both Cass County and the city of Fargo sitting on the different committees. You could certainly swap staff out for appointment of elected officials. I would envision that the staff would still be attending the meetings and providing input. It would be just the difference between who can vote and who would not be able to vote.
So we will have to take that discussion and see what we come up. Any other discussion?
Well,
Kevin Campbell?
Now that I read the fine print here, I have to comment, because even though the outreach is not addressed in the JPA, I am a representative of Clay County twice in both 1919 and 2020. And I think the other one is supposed to be Grant Whalen, so I think we already have a little typo error in here, reading closely. And I know there's been some discussions about the potential of adding others to the outreach committee, but that one has its own ability to do so, am I correct?
Correct. The only two subcommittees that were created by the joint powers agreement were the lands and the finance, because of the importance of those two committees, knowing that the finance was important to the project and that the project has a large volume of land that has to be acquired. So those are the two permanent committees. Under the joint powers agreement, you can create additional committees by resolution of the board and govern the appointments for those.
Thank you.
Mary Shirley?
As long as we've got John up there, I've just got one more question. The chair of these various committees, when is that person elected?
So the chair of the lands committee and the finance committee is elected by those committees, and we didn't put a specific timeline in for the chair for the subcommittees because it was felt that we didn't really necessarily need to at the subcommittee level. We felt that if there was a desire to change the chair, the members of that subcommittee could make that motion at any time. So in theory, you could have two different chairs in the finance committee in the same year. 3 different chairs in the Lands Committee, depending upon what that committee wanted that particular year.
Dave Pipcorn.
Just have one favor to ask of Joel for the next meeting. If you wouldn't mind, if you could figure out how much sales taxes collected out of the 525 million, where has the money come from so far from the state of North Dakota, and also where the sales tax has been collected? Because I want to know how much the city of Fargo particularly has in so much, and I think it'd be good for everyone else to know. Because I get the feeling that everyone else wants to have a say, but they don't want to put up any money. And to me, that doesn't really seem fair. If you wouldn't mind doing that, Joel, for the future, I apologize for giving you homework for the future, but I would appreciate it.
Absolutely, Commissioner Pepcorn, and I will actually get that information and get it together prior to the meeting so everybody has that in hand and can review that.
So the motion would be to go forward with this with the correction for Kevin and the land meeting with Grant Whalen being in there, otherwise as it is presented. Any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Sherling?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Pollock?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Pepcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Ms. Carlson?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Public Outreach Committee report.
Mr. Mayor, Rocky Schneider will be giving the public outreach report today.
Good afternoon, I'm Rocky Schneider with AE2S. The Public Outreach Committee met yesterday, had a good meeting, good attendance. Some of the major updates, wanted to show a picture of Joel with Colonel Jansen at the Red River Basin Commission Conference, which took place 2 weeks ago. Fargo was the host city for this. This is a conference that the Diversion has both presented at and hosted a booth at for the last 8 years at least, that I've been involved with it. And I think our audience continues to be interested in this project. The room was full. Kudos to the presenters for filling the room. Joel, I don't know if you want to comment on the presentation, the questions you got.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Schneider. Presentation went very well. The Colonel was able to give a very nice update about where the status of the Corps of Engineers portion of the project. I explained the successes that we had in 2019 and some outlook on where we're going in 2020. I didn't really receive a lot of questions while we were presenting. I think we kind of ran out of time, but after the presentation, I did receive multiple questions and I had some side conversations with a number of individuals. One interesting conversation I did have was with some folks from Winnipeg. They knew the Winnipeg Diversion project very well. And they mentioned to me offhandedly, and I haven't verified this, but I did find it interesting. They said at this point in the history of the Winnipeg Diversion, the benefit to cost ratio of that project is being calculated at about 100 to 1. So extremely significant benefit on that project. And so I think we can all take that context and somewhat relay it into what we're doing here with our diversion project.
One of the items we highlight at the booth, we had a very good location this year. It was sort of right as people entered the exhibit lounge, but the committee watched yesterday too an animated flyover of the project, and that's what we like to highlight at the booth. It's got a pop-up video. If you haven't seen it, I urge you to take a look at our website or our YouTube site and take a look at it, because you can sit and watch it for about 3 minutes and really get a good education about the project. But it's always very popular with attendance at these type of things. The committee also reviewed more in depth than just this one slide, but a lot of analytics for the outreach programs we have, both the website, our newsletter, our social media, our YouTube or video efforts. This is just a good one. I wanted to highlight a couple things. This shows website traffic between 2018 and 2019. You can see a number of increases overall in the green numbers there. People are watching a little bit less on the website, the amount of time they spend on the website, and we chalk that up mainly because the governor's task force was in 2018 and people would sit and watch for an hour. That just doesn't happen on a usual basis. But I think the thing I'd like to highlight is the bars, the graph there. You can see when something does happen of significance, the website is where people go. It's probably not something people attend on a regular basis, but when there is major news, they attend. You can see in the red there at the end of the year, obviously the permit, and earlier the governor's task force. that type of stuff. And then in the blue bars earlier year, I think that's all related to start of construction and the legislative session. You see a lot more interest. And then also with the Basin Commission in town, we had Colonel Jansen in town, so we took the opportunity when Joel was meeting with them to show a video, or to take a video with him, one of those 3 questions videos we've shown before, and the Commissioner Campbell asked me to show it. It's just 2 minutes and 14 seconds, so Mr. Chair, if you're okay, it's not a super long one.
If you're okay, it's already started, so.
It's keeping it going, yeah.
Well, first and foremost, people are suffering, and the people in the St. Paul district are passionate about using our expertise to help others. And we see the flood risk that the people have suffered here, not only in terms of life, safety, and property damage, but also the limitations to economic vitality for the region. We're very involved with disaster response. We work with local, state, federal partners under many federal authorities. We do things like technical assistance. We provide things like sandbags and pumps. But we would always like to get out of disaster response and rather focus efforts on long-term flood risk reduction. This is a large-scale project which will deliver reliable flood risk mitigation for the Fargo-Moorhead metro area and the region at large. Yeah, we have great momentum in 2019 heading into 2020. We look at some of the major structures we have. The diversion inlet control structure, work underway. We're doing pile load testing to make sure that we have a sound foundation moving forward as we build that. In November, we awarded a $59 million contract for the Wild Rice River structure. And then moving east at the Red River structure, we've got a large-scale physical model that was built down in Vicksburg, Mississippi at the Engineering Research and Development Center. This will allow us to complete the design of that major structure. And then design work continues on the southern embankment and the I-29 raise.
Maybe just one comment on that. You notice the physical model the Colonel talks about. Matt Stamness with Cass County joined a contingent down there. I'm not sure if anybody else locally went with, but he was down there this week, and I believe we shared some pictures of that online too. If anybody else wants to go down there and feel like Godzilla and walk around the model, I know Terry is more than welcome to bring in some more people down there. I think one other outreach item. One other outreach item we talked about is we're updating the communications plan. And I know a number of you have been a part of focus groups, and we're working to schedule more to figure out what we can do to, as we enter this new implementation phase of the project, how to communicate better. But as part of that, we're trying to get some solid data, and so there'll be a tearaway postcard type return that's going out to the public in Fargo and West Fargo, Moorhead, and in the upstream area in the next week or two. We're working with the post office to get a permit that we need for that to send out. But it's really about how people consume media about the project. It's not really a poll, like a political poll necessarily. It's really want to know where you are geographically, how you feel about the project, but then where do you get your news? Do you get enough news? And would you like to receive more, in what fashion? And so we can really have some hard data that feeds into the plan. So if you get something in the mailbox or hear about it, I'm happy to share that with the board too, so that there's no surprises out there about getting a mail.
Very good, thank you. Land Management, Mary Shirley, do you have a committee report?
Yes, thank you. Rocky's going to go through the report, but I'll just briefly highlight a couple of the things we discussed. We are going to have Watson Association will be working on the summer crop loss program, which would be a very rare occurrence, but I know that's been a concern of ag producers. So we're also going to be exploring the Prevent Plant program and the risks. And we'll have that information at our next meeting. So I'm happy to say that we're moving forward with those things. There's been quite a bit of activity with the Cass Joint Board working on land acquisition, and some real challenges as well on just simply getting access for the morphology access that we need to do. So that's been a considerable amount of work that's gone into that. Also, I don't know, Kevin, do you have anything you want to add from the Minnesota acquisition team?
No, not at this time. There is progress being made. We have gotten a few agreements on Floyd's easements in Clay County, and we continue to work on the biogeo access, as well as easements for the, to do the soil borings for the tieback levee or the main levee.
Thank you. So with that, I'll just have Rocky go through the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Rocky Schneider, again, filling in for Eric Dodds today. I know a lot of you like to see the numbers. I think there's a lot of update and you hear a lot of action going on, both in the news and from committee, but sometimes it's putting the numbers to it makes it pretty real. So since last meeting on December 11th, 42 parcels have been approved for appraisals, 5 parcels have been acquired. The joint board in Cass County has started formal negotiations on 86 parcels, which means they've taken official action. Letters to start those formal negotiations have gone out to 34 of them. Agreements have reached on 4 of those parcels after they start formal negotiations. I think that's always important to note that because of the legislative timelines, you have to start formal negotiations in order to get them by the end date, but doesn't mean you can't still negotiate in that time and come to conclusion. And so I think that just shows that success. As we prepare for the spring planting season, we have about half of the leases secured for project-owned lands for 2020, and so those will be worked on over the next couple of months. As Commissioner Campbell said, we're continuing to secure rights of entry to support the southern embankment in both North Dakota and Minnesota, and we're continuing to secure environmental monitoring easements for both the biotic and geomorphic. Joel mentioned earlier that we've submitted the mitigation plan for review by the North Dakota State Engineer, and that's a 150-plus page document that is a major effort and really going to be a step forward when we get to release that in the coming months here. I think it was talked about that we're working with NDSU again to update the ag impact study. I think this was something you've reviewed in the past. We are updating it now with Plan B based off what we submitted to the Minnesota DNR and changes since. Mary mentioned working with Watson Associates, and then kind of this last item is really the big one. We're preparing for the Floyd easement valuation study. This is the question that maybe we can't yet answer when somebody asks, what is Floyd easement value on my land? And so we're waiting for these final things, the CLOMAR in the coming months, the mitigation plan. Then we can feed that into the study to get actual values for each parcel. And that's the goal coming up here in the next couple of months.
Very good.
That's it.
Nothing else?
Just one thing, Eric asked me to give this report for him, and I really wanted to have an animated version of this, but one of the things I'm working on is if we could take a look back, because this is a good visual, and I think Commissioner Peterson the other day when we talked, you really liked this visual showing the tiles turning green. What I'd like to be able to do is show, all of last year, and you can see it in a visual format of, progress being made, because I think you guys see this every month, you probably understand the progress being made, but maybe for a visual for the public and for other interested parties, it would be nice to have this in a quick, GIF format that would just show you the progress being made. But anyways.
Very good. Thank you, Rick.
Thanks.
We like animation. Financial report, Mr. Grinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 80% of the time yesterday we spent in the Finance Committee was involving the audit and the decision that we have made here shortly on the WIFIA requirement for that audit. And the second item is 11C, which I believe Mr. Paulsen is going to talk about more at the end of the agenda. Having said that, the notes that Mr. Paulsen made with his executive director report, you'll see in 10A our cash revenues for the cumulative total of just under $612 million, with total expenditures, which has been reported back earlier at $526 million. Second page shows us with an $86 million balance, and then the list of payables, et cetera, and transactions. I'd be happy to answer any questions. If none, then I would move 10B for approval for the voucher approvals.
Second, moved and seconded. Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Sherling?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Pollock?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Carlson?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Contracting action C.
I'll defer to Joel.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Grinberg and Chair Mahoney. I have 3 contracting actions for the board approval today. The first contracting action is a master service agreement with the PMC, Jacobs Engineering. This is a zero cost action. However, I have spent a number of months negotiating with the PMC, made some fairly minor to significant changes that allow me to monitor the PMC to a greater extent. So I am recommending action on approving the MSA for program management services. The other contracting actions, if I may, and then we can talk about them or take any questions. The second one is task order 23A3 for services during construction for work package 43. This work package, again, is the Hickson-Baki Oxbow storm sewer project that we are intending to bid out this spring and construct this summer. This task order is for HMG's services during construction. So this will be our construction administration, reporting and closeout, and bidding services. The last task order, 26A3, work in kind for HMG. This is a task order for design services for the I-29 grade raise project that Ms. Williams discussed earlier. It is a Corps of Engineers project. HMG is doing the design work for it, and the Corps is intending to construct that project, and that is in the amount of $570,000. So I will take any questions if the board has them.
Mr. Chairman, I'd move 2 different motions. First would be the master service agreement with Jacobs.
Is there a second? Second. You want to do them both at the same time, or you just want to do?
No, I think we should do task orders separate from the master service agreement.
Okay, sure. Roll call vote.
Could I ask who made the second?
So,
Chad Peterson.
Okay. Mrs. Sherling?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
yes.
Mr. Pollock?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Pepcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Ms. Carlson?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that said, then I will move task orders 23 and 26.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Sherling?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Pollock?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Pepcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Ms. Carlson?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Executive session policy. Is that you, Joe, or?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So this is a policy that I am recommending for approval for the board, and I'll give a little context as to why I'm bringing this before you today. As we move through and into the procurement with the P3 developers, it's imperative that we maintain the integrity of certain information and conversations that are sensitive and confidential. And so in order to do that, I believe it's prudent to have an executive session policy that basically dictates who can attend executive sessions and who cannot. Obviously, the board is invited to the executive session, but in the past, we've had staff members and consultants that have also attended the executive session. So it's my recommendation within this policy that those that are not board members would need to be invited by the executive director to attend the executive session. And this is, again, to maintain the integrity of our procurement as we move through the sensitive nature of the P3 agreements.
Any questions of Joel? Can I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, question.
Chad Peterson.
Mr. Shockley, any negative ramifications to this? I think it's pretty generic, but just feel compelled to ask you that question.
Commissioner Peterson, I reviewed the policy and it's consistent with the North Dakota law, and so I don't see any ramifications. If there are people that need to attend an executive session, the executive director can invite them as long as it's within the parameters of maintaining that privilege.
So would that need a motion, or can Mr. Paulsen just ask people to show up?
It's currently as drafted in the policy. He can ask people to attend the executive session as long as it maintains the privilege.
Thank you.
And John, we won't get in trouble with the forum with this, right? Then we're not going to be in front of the paper for doing something.
No, it's just a policy. You're not, but at this moment, just to be clear, you're not going into executive session. This is just a policy on executive sessions.
Thank you. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded. Okay, Pollock did the second. Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Shirley?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Pollock?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Pepcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Ms. Carlson?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Travel reimbursement policy.
Well,
Joel, are
thank
you
you, Mr.
cleaning
Chair.
things up in policy or what?
Well, as the executive director has come on board and reviewed, processes and procedures, there has been a need to address some of these issues that I think just make sense. And travel reimbursement policy is one of those. And if the board can recall, historically, the individual entity members have reimbursed board members for travel due to diversion authority obligations and meetings. I wanted to maybe provide a recommended policy for the board to review today that addresses travel reimbursement for diversion board members and member entity staff members, and create some level of policy that would dictate how we reimburse. Basically, this policy before you would provide reimbursement from the diversion authority to member entity diversion authority members and staff when they are asked to or required to travel for diversion authority meetings, conferences, or obligations. And I've also included a standardized travel reimbursement form in the back that that will make it a little bit more easy to track those obligations and provide the reimbursement to the member entities. So.
Any questions by the board? Mayor Shirley.
Thank you. Is there any requirement as to, and maybe it's addressed in a different policy, as to when it's appropriate for members to make these trips?
There is, Commissioner Sherling. So in here, I have a number of different guidelines. So number one, if the travel is requested by the Diversion Authority Executive Director. Number two, if travel is more than 100 miles away from the Fargo-Moorhead area. Number three, the purpose of the travel is to attend a project-related meeting or conference. So that kind of sets the base guidelines. Obviously, if there were something specific that fell outside of these parameters, the executive director would report that out to the board for the reimbursement of that member entity. This by no means prevents the member entity from still continuing to reimburse the individuals if they would so like, but I do think it provides a standardized method for us to reimburse member entities through the diversion authority if they so choose.
So just for clarification, then it would be up to the executive director to decide to approve this before somebody made a trip, if the diversion authority was going to reimburse them.
That's correct.
Then I would move to approve.
Move to approve. Carlson.
I actually had a question, so.
Sure.
Okay. My question had to do with the reimbursement rate for hotel and per diem. Would we be following the federal per diem rate? I know that there's varying degrees of cost to different hotels and restaurants. So I'm just curious as to if there's any specification that could be put towards those, because I know that the commercial airline, it has coach class commercial for lodging and meals, if there's parameters around those.
Councilmember Carlson, I've set this up as to not include per diem, but to reimburse actual costs. So that would include costs for meals, lodging, transportation required to meet diversion authority obligations.
Shelley, are you trying to make it so we're conscious of hotel costs or conscious of where to stay? Is that part of it?
That's correct.
In Minnesota, are there any different rules? Because typically when we go to Washington, we stay at a hotel close to where we're doing business, and they're always expensive, but, you know, it's sometimes hard to find a value. John, did you want to comment?
Sure. With respect to the federal per diem rates, there's a rate for every community that takes into account, like if you're staying at a hotel in Minneapolis, the federal rate reimbursement rate is higher than it would be in Fargo, and those rates are available. So that rate does take into account. It's not a uniform rate across the country. So to the mayor's example, if you're staying in DC, the reimbursement rate is higher than if you were staying in Minneapolis. So hopefully that helps answer the question.
Yeah, I guess my question had more to do with being conscious of a 5-star hotel versus a 3-star hotel.
Yep.
You know, a really nice steak dinner versus a burger, just so that we're being fiscally conscious.
Could we ask, Joel, maybe you could ask or have a per diem, because sometimes we could take that, and then if you did go to the expensive meal, you would just basically get what we normally do on a per diem. So could we add that as an option?
We certainly can. I can amend the policy and add a per diem into it if the
Would that
board
be
so
okay,
chooses.
Carlson?
Yes.
That's okay.
I think the federal per diem rate is pretty generous when you're looking at various locations around the country.
Yeah, our issue sometimes of going to Washington's or a quick trip or something you had to happen, so sometimes we're not really able to have Joel pick and choose on that. So we try to be reasonable where we stay, but it's oftentimes as close to the capital. Chuck Henry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then with the per diem, like with food and hotels and all that, it'd be like a level too, because it'd be different prices for different areas, right?
Oh, that's correct, Councilmember Hendrickson. So under the federal guidelines, there are indicated areas that are higher as far as the costs for goods and services that are taken into account in the federal per diem rate.
Okay.
Any other discussion? I need a second, I think, for your motion, Mary, right? Do I have a second?
Second.
And is it okay, Grant, if we add those per diem issues added to that policy? Okay, good. Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Sherling?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Pollock?
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Pepcorn? Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Ms. Carlson?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Envision Resilience and Sustainable Program Overview. Joel's on board for that as well.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Board members, I did present this at the Finance Committee meeting yesterday, and I do realize this is the first time I'm coming before you with this program. And I intend to give you a brief overview of the program and how it may be applicable to the Diversion Authority project. I also want to talk about some of the perceived benefits of adding Envision to the Diversion Authority framework. But this is for informational purposes. I will talk a little bit about how I intend to proceed with this in anticipation of providing board members more information for a potential decision at the next board meeting. So today I do have Quinn McKenzie from Luceo. She will be here, introduce herself, talk about Envision a little bit. I'll answer some questions along with Quinn at the end of this presentation and provide some guidance moving forward. So Quinn, if you may.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Chair Mahoney and board members. As Joel mentioned, my name is Quinn McKenzie, and I am a strategic consultant and the co-founder of Luceo Consulting. I have facilitated planning and design processes for infrastructure projects across North America in order to enhance asset performance and resilience. And I've given you just a sample of some of the projects where I have successfully been able to implement the Envision framework in order to promote resilience and asset performance with successful outcomes. I would also like to say right off the bat that I'm here to talk to you about the opportunity to leverage Envision on this project. and use it as a platform to document and articulate all of the good things that have been done to date on this project that may not be technical in nature and may be difficult to quantify and therefore difficult to communicate to the public and various stakeholders. And in order to leverage these, we can use Envision to the benefit of the project to communicate effectively with the public and funding agencies through a nationally recognized framework for resiliency.
And I'll interrupt Quinn just for a second here. One of my main goals with bringing this before you today has to do with public information and communication. And I think the board overwhelmingly has supported my role in trying to enhance our communication with all parties involved, not just affected parties, but stakeholders, funding agencies at the state, federal, and all of the local entities that are involved. This part of what we're talking about here is an attempt to enhance our communication program and talk about a framework for how we want to kind of change that and modify it moving forward. Now, we don't have any answers for you today, but I just want the board to keep that in mind as we continue to move forward in Quinn's presentation.
Thank you, Joel. So let's start off with what is resilience. So resilience is the ability to successfully adapt and or recover readily from a significant disruption. And I think with that definition, it's pretty clear that this project fundamentally is a resilience project, not only for both the financial and economic resilience for the Fargo-Moorhead area to be able to recover from a flood event, but also inherently this project's ability to save lives. So I've outlined a few challenges and opportunities, and as Joel mentioned, I am not currently on this project team, so this is my understanding of the project to date, and additional details are things that I definitely have interest in exploring in order to tailor this more to this project. So the first challenge is uncertainty in the timing of the federal funding to complete the core portion of the work on schedule. And through using Envision as a platform, this can further enhance the business case and rationale for federal funding, particularly that federal funding that's focused with resilience. The second on this list, which Joel has already alluded to, is lack of consistent understanding from the community and stakeholders on the project's purpose, goals, and benefits. And so Envision is a platform to effectively communicate to the community all the good work that's been done to date, and it also provides a set of best practices for community and public engagement, which can be leveraged on this project in order to ensure that everything that is being communicated with stakeholders is done effectively and to the highest standard. And it also allows the communication strategy to be ranked and scored under that framework to show its effectiveness. And then lastly on this list, this is a very complex project with many different players, as I'm sure you all know. So the Corps, the Diversion Authority, the P3, the cities of Fargo and Moorhead, and both Cass and Clay counties. And because of that, it involves a lot of different coordination pieces. What Envision does is it encourages integration. It provides one set of best practices for all of the project components and allows us to, through a series of workshops and meetings, coordinate the different elements of the project to determine potential redundancies, synergies, and overall project optimization. So there's an opportunity for that as well. So what is Envision? And I recognize that this is probably a new concept to everybody here. So Envision is a framework and a platform for infrastructure projects. It is a North America-wide standard. It was launched in 2012 as a pilot, and the most recent version was launched in 2018, which is version 3. It's focused on infrastructure project delivery. It has been applied on P3 projects before successfully, and it can be implemented anytime during planning or design. It considers the entire project lifecycle, so into construction and then also into operations and maintenance, and looking at optimizing those elements as well. It has currently been applied on hundreds of projects across North America, and it is a standard for resilience. Implementation of Envision not only supports sound economic development, job creation, purchase of local goods and services, but it also promotes the enhancement of the quality of life for citizens and how to communicate those positive impacts, as well as promoting a more effective and efficient use of financial resources. Envision was created by the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure, which is a nonprofit organization. It is different from the LEAD framework, which some of you may have heard of, in the sense that it is not a prescriptive framework. It is holistic and outcomes-based, and there are many different options to get to the same levels of scoring depending on the project. And this is because it was designed to be applied to all different types of infrastructure projects, ranging from wastewater, transportation, flood management projects, water treatment, energy plants. In order to make this framework implementable, the American Public Works Association, American Society of Civil Engineers, and the American Council of Engineering Companies were thoroughly engaged throughout the creation of not only the pilot, but also versions 2 and versions 3 of the framework. And I say that because all of these different parties are very aware of what the best practices in the industry are and how they can actually be implemented on projects. There are 64 credits across 5 categories, which you can see right now. And I will point out that none of these credits are mandatory for a project. So a project can select any of these credits that they would like to pursue, depending on what the goals of the project are, the priorities of the community, and where different elements of what's been done on the project to date can fit in with the framework. And so the 5 different categories are quality of life, leadership, resource allocation, natural world, and climate and resilience. And I will point out as well that this last category here, climate and resilience, is really focused on risk management and resilience of a project, and there is a lot of synergy between that and this project and potential funding opportunities in that narrative. So some example opportunities that are highlighted under Envision that I've pulled out for this project are facilitating public education throughout construction. So what I found on other projects is that construction can be a confusing time for the public, wayfinding can be problematic, noise impacts can be problematic, and so Envision is a platform for being able to communicate some of those impacts and then also establish mechanisms for feedback which are based on best practices across the industry. Another thing Envision encourages is conducting a life cycle economic evaluation, so looking at not only what the capital cost of the project is, but also what benefits are being had by the region for the entire life cycle of the project, extending beyond construction finishing. Through using Envision, we could review and enhance community and the public outreach program, and we could promote more transparency and accountability with the public because this is a third-party governed framework, and there is an opportunity for third-party verification to demonstrate this project's performance under Envision. And it also can show that communication systems can be robust through a series of best practices. We can also evaluate risk and maximize resilience. I apologize for the mistake on the slide, and find ways to quantify things that usually are only qualifiable. And lastly, we can promote infrastructure integration and synergies, as I already mentioned, between the different elements of the project, which would increase collaboration and communication, examine potential scope overlaps or potential redundancies, and identify opportunities to optimize material and labor for the project with the overall goal of saving costs. Some last benefits is that this is an internationally recognized framework. It's an opportunity to document and articulate all of the great things that this project has been done, that have been done on this project to date for this community that may not be technical in nature. So the benefits outside the fact that this is a flood management project, and effectively communicate to the public and funding agencies what these benefits are. There's also an opportunity, it's not mandatory, to achieve third-party validation of the project through an internationally recognized award. So thank you very much, board members, and we can take any questions.
Well, thank you, Quinn. I'll just add a couple of things. I know this is a lot to take in one session, and this is meant to be an introductory discussion with the board about Envision and the benefits that I see for this project through Envision. Now, Envision came from, and partly was created because of the lack of funding for infrastructure-related projects in the United States. Every year, ASCE does a report card on North America's infrastructure in the United States, and it's consistently below a grade level C. And in most cases, it's been D+ and consistently graded low. So in our world, these sorts of techniques are an attempt to be able to tweak the design process, tweak the project process in order to get more value out of the dollars that we currently have in order to maximize our impact on our project. Because we're not getting any more dollars into infrastructure, so we need to extend those dollars. So the point here is to save money, create efficiency, and create an enhanced communication, all within a framework that allows us to look at key performance indicators, provide those indicators to the board so that we can show that we're making progress, we're extending dollars, we're saving money. And that's the intent here. Now, Quinn and I both have a lot of work to do to really bring before the board specific examples and quantify specific dollar amounts of how this process is going to provide savings to the board. So I am moving forward with Quinn and having her do some preliminary work so that I can schedule meetings with individual members of the board, do a brown bag meeting, and provide real quantitative data to the board so that we can make a decision on whether the board would like to move forward with implementing the Envision process into the Diversion Authority project.
So what's your ask of the board today, Joel?
I would like to provide a advanced work directive under the executive director's powers contained within the JPA to provide a small task order to Luceo to do some preliminary work, bring that before the board and do a brown bag session and provide real life data about our project in relation to how Envision can assist and provide
value. Is there a
value.
value? There's a cost to that?
There's a cost. I'm presenting about a $40,000 budget with Luceo in order to do the preliminary.
So that's the request?
That's correct.
$40,000 to look to Envision. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll move the motion, and then I have some comments after, if there's a second.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second. Discussion. You
Mr.
had
Chairman, and I would certainly yield to Mr. Peterson or Mr. Hendrickson or Mayor, who are on the Finance Committee. As I alluded to earlier, almost half of our meeting yesterday was on this topic. And I think it's fair to say, at least from what I heard, that everyone is having a hard time getting their heads around this. And to be simple, we have 4 legs of a stool for the diversion. Talented people, moving a lot of dirt, concrete and steel. It's not like a typical P3 project in New York or California where lean methodologies or efficiencies are applied, because this is meat and potato kind of project. It's big, but it's meat and potato. And so the value, I think, what I heard from the committee yesterday is how do you define the value of savings? And that's really the Finance Committee's job as we move forward, is to guard the checkbook. Don't bring anything new in that's going to change the plan at $2.75 billion. And so there was a lot of discussion on that yesterday. And afterwards, there was over here was a discussion about this language being added to the P3 bid to evaluate what the P3 bidders would say about this program. And I think that's really, to what Joel is recommending, worth the effort to do this. I woke up this morning, and I don't know about you, when I go to bed and I consult my pillow, I think about the challenges of the day and come up with different maybe feeling or sentiment in the morning. And so this morning, in respect to Joel and his leadership, our responsibility is to support him. He thinks this is important. But if he would have asked today for a $400,000 contract, I wouldn't be saying this. And there's one person in the room that really carries a lot of weight for us, and that's Mr. Nicholson. And I think what Joel has alluded to is what Martin had as a suggestion to baby step this for Quinn to help. As I understand, what I believe is what we're working on is for Quinn to help guide and be involved with that bid package. And then we evaluate what that means from what the P3 bidders say and whether this is a worthwhile program to move forward on a larger scale. So that was my thought this morning after talking to Martin, talking briefly to Joel, and I believe it's what his intent is, and the decision before you today. And I'd yield to the other three on the commission, or the finance committee for
Peterson
their.
had a comment or question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, your pillow concentration is why I don't sleep a whole lot at night. Mr. Paulsen, you and I spoke prior, and you said you have a breadth of experience, as does Ms. McKenzie. Can you give me an example or two or five of where you've cost $500,000 and saved $10 million? And I'm looking for that black and white. I'm looking for a, yes, you're going to pay me $500,000, but I promise I'll save you 10.
So I was looking for examples for this, and the main conflict that I ran into is the financials for all of the projects that I have worked on to date are confidential. And so it is very challenging for me to share that information because it is confidential and I need to respect my previous clients. However, I think through working through this process and being able to tailor numbers to this project is incredibly important, because the projects where I've applied Envision in the past may have had different contexts, different settings, different delivery methods potentially, and may not be comparable to the project we're dealing with here right now. So I think I appreciate the desire for just a number on cost savings right now, but I actually think that a more worthwhile number would happen through this process that we are asking for today.
Mr. Mayor, or Mr. Chairman, can I continue?
Go ahead.
So then could you give me a scenario where, without naming a project, say, I'm trying to quantify what it is you do. You know, we talked about the LEAD program, and I know it's not a parallel, it's not a fair analogy. I'm not big on LEAD, as you might guess, but again, my struggle is I'm not understanding what it is you do. So right now, I'm not supporting the motion because it's just that simple for me. And educate me, give me something that I can go, oh, okay, that might make a little bit of sense at least. You've got to have something.
Of course. So I did work on a wastewater treatment facility project, and we were able to save the budget by 40% through land optimization for that project. And that was explored through using the Envision framework, and that was one of the synergies we discovered for that project. So there's one example. Through integrating early and providing synergies in different project parties, like what I've described, collaboration between the Corps, the P3, and the other participants in this project, I believe there's the value of integration. And I also worked on another project where we were able to establish 20% savings on that project due to that integration. And part of that was directly from having early contractor involvement, but another part of that was through having scope agreements between different projects that interacted with each other, but were being managed by different teams, and there were redundancies between those different elements. And I can see that opportunity potentially here between the P3 component, the in-town components, and the core components. And so identifying those redundancies could save money on this project. I will also say that out of all the projects I've worked on, I have never had a budget go over or a schedule go over because of Envision.
Mr. Pipcorn.
Mr. Chair, so I'm the least intelligent person at the counter here today. So I have a question for Joel. So I'm familiar with value engineering, where you have, can you explain this? Is this similar to value engineering except higher levels or more levels?
This is somewhat similar to value engineering, and it's really focusing on the processes that will deliver the project, and it's about making sure that we're documenting and asking the right questions as we make decisions about the processes and about the project elements. I'll just give a hypothetical scenario of how I'm thinking about this. So, have we ever asked ourselves the question of, where might the developer source the equipment for this project? Are they going to source it locally? Are they going to bring the equipment in? Are we requiring them to do anything? What are the financial implications if we have the developer source equipment locally? What are the financial implications if we have the developer source workforce locally? Are they bringing workforce in? It's those types of questions that, yeah, we've kind of asked, but it's never really been a part of our decision-making process. And we haven't made any requirements within any documents that would really quantify what that means. I was just talking to a state legislator prior to this meeting today, and the legislator asked, what is the regional impact of this project? As we build it, we know there's regional impact. We saw it with the Sanford Hospital. I think we're seeing it somewhat with Block 9. Whenever there's a project of this magnitude and this size, it affects our local economy. And I don't think we've ever really dug into that issue and really fully understood it and asked those questions and then documented that and worked with the chamber, other groups that are interested in business to fully understand the impact of what this project is going to have to many different industries, the housing market, what have you. And so those are the type of questions that's a part of what the Envision framework is. It really is pretty broad-based and encompasses a lot of different areas of what we're doing. You know, now I know the board knows this is probably one of the most complex projects. And to Commissioner Grimberg's comments, of course, it's a big ditch. You know, we're moving a lot of dirt, and it's a little bit different than a tollway or something along those lines. But this is a complex project, and I think you've all heard Mr. Shockley talk about the financing for this project, and that this financing plan is probably one of the most complex financing plans in the country right now for a project. So when we look at the financing plan, are we asking the right questions? What are the impacts? Who's doing what? What's the communication protocols? These are the questions that in some cases we're asking already. I mean, there's a lot of what we're talking about here with the Envision process that the PMC is already doing. We're not necessarily documenting that and making key performance indicators to monitor the performance of it. I also kind of look at this analogous to, this is an audit on the implementation of the project. So we do an audit on the financial side, but are we also benchmarking how well we're performing on the implementation of the management of the project and the design of the project, and what are those indicators and how are we monitoring them and reporting them to the board?
Mr. Chairman, so on behalf of the less intelligent people like myself, I'll make the motion, or I'll second the motion that, and obviously we can have further discussion, but my opinion is the more technical assistance that we can get, all of us, we have our own strengths and weaknesses, but this is a huge thing, and the more smart people we can get involved, evaluating it from different perspectives is money well spent.
Okay, Chuck Hendricks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joel, it kind of sounds to me like it's got the same type of leanings like lean, the lean program, the lean principles. Is it kind of like that?
Like lean construction, to clarify, is that what you mean?
Yeah, well, just lean in
like
business.
lean manufacturing, lean construction?
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually presented on the lean, at the lean construction conference last year on Envision, and the implementation I was using at the Vancouver Airport Authority for that project. And so I would say there are many synergies between Envision and lean, and we're looking at optimization of systems, of energy, of water, of materials, and of course of money. And so I think that it's fair to make that comparison, and I think that there are many credits of the 64 that optimize lean processes and integrated design principles as well.
I know the lean program. I've worked with it. It saves companies a lot of money. So I'm going to support this, but I'd like to see results. Mm-hmm. But if it's anywhere like the lean program, yeah, it's a good program.
Chuck, do you think I could use her around the airport, helping with the airport?
No, that's in Fargo. I really wouldn't know anything about that.
Very surely.
Thank you. So just a couple of questions. How long does it take to get some results from this, and are we too far down the road?
So we're not too far down the road. Envision can be implemented during planning or design. The earlier it can be implemented, the better. So I think that starting now with exploring before the P3 has been decided is a good thing to do. The scope of work that is being proposed today would carry forward to have results for the next Finance Committee meeting, and that's the goal, is to be able to present some updated results at that meeting. Is that correct, Joel?
That's correct, yeah.
And then potential schedule could be presented at that time for opportunities for the program to continue into the future.
Chairman in Finance looks a little frowny face. I'll finish with Mary first, but.
Sure.
Thank you. And then I was curious if Mr. Nicholson has had any personal experience with this program or a program like it. Tony, are you going to make a correction? They're not going to have a final?
Clarification.
Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Sherling, I have not had direct experience with the Envision program. As I believe Quinn mentioned, it's a fairly recent program, started in 2012, I believe is when it kicked off. And I've been here since 2012, so I have not had a chance to work with it.
Thank you.
But just to be clear, Mr. Nicholson, Jacobs Engineering does provide services for the assistance with Envision. Right?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I heard all the words, and I understand the words, but I really don't have a clue what it is that you're asking. And it looks like this is the first time it's come before this board, and all that we really have to go on is the presentation. But it looks to me like you're asking for $40,000 to give us a bid on a $500,000 project. Have I summarized that?
Commissioner Pollack, you're somewhat close. So I think the Envision process would be integrated into what we do throughout the life of the project, and even into operations and maintenance. Now, Quinn would not be with us that entire time. She would help and assist in setting up the program within our internal consultants and our program management consultant and the diversion authority. And once that is set up, she would assist in providing and helping to quantify these key performance indicators that are so important in order to verify our progress on the project. But I think because it's a new concept, because it's new information, because there's a lot of questions that the board has, I need a little bit of information, and I need Quinn to work with Quinn to get her involved and up to speed on all the inner workings of what's happening right now between the different consultants and the program management consultant in order to bring the board and the finance committee hard and fast numbers and ideas that this project will move forward with. Now, this would be a hourly not to exceed. I just want to have enough budget in order to, if we get to the point where she needs to dig in a little bit deeper on some things, or we need to do a little bit more work in order to provide that value to the board, we have that ability to do that in order to make sure that we're making the right decision on where we move forward on.
So just to be clear, actually what happened, this was presented to the Finance Committee yesterday, and actually was a commitment of $400,000 at that point to hire this company to come on board. There was enough confusion in the Finance Committee as to what is her value, or what this company, Lucio's value is to the project, that we asked Joel to rethink it, which is basically now the $45,000 commitment, and a brown bag next week to have, once Quinn's had time to look at the project, for them to do a brown bag for the DA authority and show us what value is that they would bring to the diversion. And then at that point, if we elected maybe want to do more, then it would come back to finance next month for a bigger project contract.
If I might continue. Well, this might be something that I could support, and I probably won't be sitting here at the next meeting, but since I have the vote today, it's difficult for me to process the whole thing. But there is someone in the audience that I would like to get an opinion of, and I'm calling him blind because neither he or I knew about it. But I really appreciate Jeff Volk's perspective on things, and since he is an engineer, and the engineers really are doing what I think to be all these same things that we're talking about, Mr. Chairman, would it be okay if we just asked an opinion of Mr. Volk on this topic?
Jeff, are you comfortable on this?
Mr. Chairman, allow me, while Jeff's contemplating that suggestion, a couple points, clarification. One, from earlier discussion with the audit, we will clearly be under budget of $100,000 with Eide Bailey and this $40,000. The intent of my support wasn't $40,000 for a month to come back and have another presentation for a full scope of work. The intent of my motion was $40,000 to work with our P3 process and tell that document to the bidders, and then they come back and tell us the value side, so we get objective value and not, with all due respect, the process and the consulting messaging to do this. I want to hear from the P3 contractors. And the way we've labeled this is that would be inserted into that with Quinn's help. Not 40,000 for another month to come back and have more meetings and then decide what to do, because I think the P3 final bid process is what date?
18th.
Final is 18th of February.
The next RFP submittal to the developers will be February 9th.
The next, but the final is what I'm asking.
The final is, August 14th and September 30th for the technical proposals. But we're going to want to incorporate Envision language into the RFP immediately so that we can begin those conversations.
Which is the intent of Quinn's expertise to help with that, and that's the
Yes.
extent of the motion.
So Commissioner Grimberg, I think that's appropriate, and I think that's fine. What Quinn needs to do is dig into some things in order to do that, and her ability to do that is going to provide us information that we can bring back to the board as well. So I view the $40,000 as being able to accomplish that mission, and the value would be we could also bring that information to the board and discuss it. So.
Okay. Jeff, any comment or? You can come to the mic. You're welcome to speak.
Is there a button you got? Is it working?
It's working, yeah.
Okay. Caught me off guard, Ken. So first reaction is any opportunity you can to improve the schedule, the budget, quality. I think it's worth investigating. If I'm understanding it right, you're kind of dipping your toe into the process to discern if it is a reasonable process. I'm not familiar with it personally, so I can't speak to it from experience at all. But on a $2.75 billion venture, it seems like a small investment to determine if you can improve process and budget.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, in respect to Commissioner Pollock, we have a rhythm here, and we have to entrust our director, and time is kind of the essence on these things. So I get your question, but there's a rhythm we've been establishing here, and you're kind of coming into it and catching up, so to speak. But I appreciate the question, but we got to continue moving forward.
So unless there's any other discussion, roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Sherling?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
No.
Mr. Pollock?
No.
Dr. Mahoney?
Aye.
Mr. Pepcorn? Aye. Mr. Grinberg?
Aye.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Aye.
Ms. Carlson?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Wayland?
Yes.
Mr. Thorsted?
Yes.
Thank you, Quinn.
I think we're down to the end of our agenda.
Well,
Public partnership overview, risk transfer. Is this easier or more difficult?
So no, this is easier. There's no action to be taken. This is for your information only. What I want to do with the board is have one of these sessions at each board meeting. I want to provide some educational context about P3 as we start to move through different phases of the procurement. I want to ensure that the board understands the decisions being made, why they're being made, and provide the information that I believe is important for your decision-making process.
Joel, could I ask, I'm losing many members here.
Yes, I see that.
Would it be okay we'd late at next meeting, or, I mean, I'd rather you've taken the time to do a discussion. I'd like to have them all see it, so if I'm losing half of them, do you mind, or is it 10, 15 minutes?
It's about 15 minutes, so if anybody can't wait that long, I can wait, but I did intend to have another educational session at the next board meeting. So I guess it's up to the board if they'd like this. I will just quickly turn it over to Mr. Shockley, and I'm sure he will go fairly quickly through it.
Well, I'm supposed to be somewhere 10 minutes ago, so
Okay.
my chairman's position would be we'll delay till next month if it's okay with the board
Okay.
at this time. Sorry, but
That's okay.
next meeting is actually, Kevin, you said that'd be the 20th, right? February?
No, that was just for the MCC JPA meeting.
Oh, okay.
That was the only part of the calendar that.
Next meeting will be the 27th. Chad Peterson.
Mr. Mayor, real quick, just as information and reminder to some, myself, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Montplaisir, as well as another member of the Auditor's Office will be in Washington, D.C. at the end of this month. at the end of February and the beginning of March. So if for whatever reason we need to communicate to people in DC, we'll have a couple team members.
We'll strongly look at that, because if you guys are going to be in Washington, keep our costs down, we might as well have somebody
And
visit.
we are setting a meeting
senators. Yep.
with our congressman and our 2 senators right now. So if something happens, we'll be there, let us know.
Very good. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.